So we have new polling on President Trump's handling of some top issues. The latest AP New RC poll finds roughly 6 out of 10 adults disapprove of the president on immigration, the economy, and foreign policy. And if we take a closer look at immigration, 67% of independents disapprove of Trump on that issue. And we should note this poll taken in the last week or so during the aftermath of what we saw there in Minneapolis. Independents, 67% disapproving of President Trump's handling of immigration. Let's now bring in our panel. With us, we have managing editor at The Bulwark, Sam Stein, the former host of Hardball, Chris Matthews, and contributing opinion writer for The New York Times, Molly Jong-Fast. Our thanks to all of you for being with us. Sam, let's start with you. Those polls suggest, and there's been a number of them, that this is supposed to have been a signature issue for President Trump. He is now decidedly underwater. That could bode poorly for Republicans come November, especially, I'd argue, if the president follows through with his threat to invoke the Insurrection Act, putting potentially armed military personnel on the streets of an American city.
Yeah, I mean, 38% overall approval for immigration in that poll is startling. You could say maybe, well, it's just one poll, but this is actually part of a larger swath of polls that have come out showing similar findings. That 38% is actually lower than his overall approval rating in that poll. That's very rare for Trump. Usually he has a lower approval rating, but better marks on immigration. Yeah. And look, I think it just gets to the point, which is there's something deeply senseless about all this. You look at the scenes in Minneapolis, and the question I'm always sort of getting back to is, what is this for? What is this for? If it's for fraud, to uncover fraud, as they say, then why did they push out the lead U.S. attorney in Minneapolis who had uncovered all the fraud? If it's to crack down on immigration, surely there are better ways than to terrorize communities. And you're seeing anecdotally in these videos coming out of the city that people who, weren't necessarily politically involved are being not radicalized by this, but being inspired to come out and protest this. There's a viral clip yesterday, some guy who was walking down the street. He's like, I've never protested in my life. He's like, but I'm out here because I have friends who have been detained. They're U.S. citizens. They're just coming home from work. He's like, I have to be out here for my community. You see Joe Rogan. You see some other podcasters say, this is just wrong. And it's visually alarming. And I want to ask Chris about that because, I mean, look, we've been around immigration. It's a pendulum issue. Sometimes people are more restrictionist and nativists. Sometimes people are more open to reform. But it's the images coming out of Minnesota, I think, that are so compelling here because you see this shocking thing where the federal government has descended upon a major U.S. city and turned it into a chaos.
Sam, no one thinks that Renee Good was a terrorist.
No one.
And no one really believes that she steered her car in a direction of the agent, of the ICE agent. People thought that she was murdered. And that's the mood about a middle-class woman, a white woman, not an immigrant, not an illegal immigrant, a person who just had a point of view. And one thing about this whole thing that struck me overnight, I was thinking about this, John, is that if you look at what Trump's trying to do in Venezuela, he's trying to impose sort of a democratic American-style regime in a country that does not buy into that politically. And now he's trying to create a happiness about his immigration policy in Minnesota. Minnesota is still a liberal town. It's still a sanctuary town. They're not accepting this imposition from the ICE agents. You can put all the ICE agents in the world in that country, in that city, and they're not going to behave the way Trump people, MAGA people, want them to. They're just not going to. They're saying to the country, I'm going to protest, I'm going to get out in the street, and I'm going to let people know what I think about this behavior. People do like the border closed. Good. Nobody's complained about it. Not even Hispanic leaders are complaining about it. It's one thing that everybody realized that Joe Biden blew. He completely blew the whole situation of immigration, illegal immigration. But in terms of picking people up, the president says, I'm not going to touch farm workers. I'm not going to touch hospital workers. Well, who else is on his good list? But he says, but we're going to tackle everybody at the Target store in Minnesota. Come on. This is like letting the former president of Honduras out of jail and giving him a pass. It's weird. There's no sense to any. I guess the word is fairness. Are you picking bad guys off the street? Yeah. If you're taking people out of prison and kicking them out of the country, okay, I can live with that. But why are you going after the person in the pew next to me at church on Sunday? Why are you going after the person who's paying their taxes, the person who's paying Social Security that they'll never get anything out of, who doesn't vote, who doesn't get to be a citizen? Why are you going after them? And I think that 67% of independent voters that said they don't like this is really politically important coming this November, I think.
Yeah, the policy incoherent, and some would say belligerent. We should also underscore the vast majority of these protests have been very peaceful in Minneapolis. Some there on the ground think it actually was the ICE agents, the Border Patrol agents, trying to instigate some conflict. So on this subject, a recent letter to the editor of the New York Times by a man named Isaac Pagan of Salina, Texas, talks about how American citizens are living in fear. And he writes in part this: I am a Hispanic American and a United States citizen by birth who believes deeply in the foundational tenets of this nation. But for the first time in my 42 years, I live in fear. Fear that I'll be stopped because I look the way I look, or because I was overheard speaking Spanish to my wife or son, both American citizens. Fear that I looked at an agent the wrong way, or that we won't have our passports on us because why would we? Fear that I'll say the wrong thing, and that even if my words are justified, I'll be beaten or taken, or worse, my family will be. Fear that my son will witness it and have to live with that memory. Fear of ultimately being disappeared. What a wild thing to write. I live in fear, and there is little else I can do but write letters like this, because I have dwindling faith that my representatives in Congress have either the willingness or the ability to help. And Molly, obviously a gutting letter to read, heart-wrenching words, and piggyback to the example that Sam brought us a moment ago of a person in Minneapolis saying, well, I've never in my life protested anything, but I have to here. This person, an American citizen, saying, I've never lived in fear before, but I do now. Yeah. This is the culture that this administration has created.
Yeah, and I think, look, I was in touch with Governor Walz yesterday. You see pictures of him and the mayor of Minneapolis. The two of them look like they have not slept in a week. All they say, and Walz was telling me, like, it's all about trying to get people to be peaceful, to try to, they're reaching out to anyone they can to sort of quiet everything, quell the disturbance, make everyone be peaceful. They are really laser focused on peaceful action. And I think it's important to realize that the reason that ICE is in Minneapolis is because, or at least the theory of the case, right, why they're doing it is because of these YouTube videos, the Nick Shirley videos about the fraud that happened in 2022, where people were already prosecuted for it. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, just what Sam was saying. So I think it just is so wrong. But also the other thing I want to say is, like, our country has done this before. They have done these kind of Kavanaugh stops, right? That's what it's called now, of like detaining people because of the way they look, right? They did this historically, and it always sweeps up American citizens. It always sweeps up everyone. That's why we had laws to prevent this. And so I do think it's super, it's just, the good news is when you watch that video of that man talking about the experience that Sam was talking about before, you really do see that most Americans don't want to live like this.
Polls certainly underscore that. We'll see what happens between now and November. Turning now to what the White House saying that President Trump was just kidding when he recently said the United States should not hold elections this November. Trump made the comment during an interview with Reuters on Wednesday. When discussing potential midterm losses for Republicans, Trump said, quote, "It's some deep psychological thing, but when you win the presidency, you don't win the midterms." He then added, "When you think of it, we shouldn't even have an election." White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt was asked about it yesterday.
The president was simply joking. He was saying, we're doing such a great job, we're doing everything the American people thought, maybe we should just keep rolling. But he was speaking facetiously.
So, Chris Matthews, in your latest opinion piece in the Washington Post, you analyze the tough fight Republicans may have during the upcoming midterm elections. And you write in part this: to avoid its own shellacking, the GOP needs to find a way for the president to awaken the full MAGA base. The problem with that? The more the party works to put the fate of Trump's presidency on the ballot, the more the Democratic base will tune in and turn out, too. That leaves the persuadable middle. Are those who decided on Trump in 2024 happy with what he's given them? Or are they coming to believe that they've been taken for a ride? And first, a quick note just to say that we should not dismiss President Trump's election rhetoric here as just necessarily a joke. And certainly there are plenty of Democratic governors who feel like it might not be. But Chris, you certainly make a great point here in your piece. And that persuadable middle that many of them went Trump 16, Biden 20, Trump 24. Well, if polls are to be believed, they don't like what they're seeing now.
Yeah, and I think Trump is aware he has to face his party, and he personally has to take a referendum on his behavior coming this November. And I think it's going to be 30 seats in the House and a questionable result in the U.S. Senate. There's a possibility they can win the 4 seats, given what's happened in Alaska. They have a chance of winning 4 seats and winning the control of the Senate. But I looked at where he went. He went up to the Poconos up near Scranton. I know what he did. That's where all his vulnerable people are, in Scranton, in the Lehigh Valley, in Harrisburg. We got Scott Perry. All 3 of those gentlemen all got elected with 50% of the vote. They are right on the edge. They're the first people that will lose. So if you're watching election night, and I'll be watching it this November, on election night, the first returns that'll come in, well, these people all lose because they'll be the first ones in the line of 30 that are going to lose. The people who are the most vulnerable are the ones oftentimes who are in their sophomore years. They've got 2 years behind them, not enough time to develop any connection with the voter. They're going to be vulnerable. And I look at Josh Shapiro, who's going to be at the top of the ticket in Pennsylvania, running against, it looks like a real right-winger, he's been lucky again. It looks like he's got another crazy to go against him. He will be a strong leader. He's a conscientious first person. He seems like a moderate political person, not a left, right, or whatever. He just seems like a guy that's doing the job. Josh Shapiro is going to bring in the ticket. Wrong direction. Powerful, the Democrats. Independent voters, powerful for the Democrats. Everything indicates to me Trump is facing and knows he's facing a brutal November.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that. First of all, Doug Mastriano was he wasn't a strong candidate.
No, he was the worst.
He was the worst.
An abortion, too. Same thing.
I've been surprised by how little. I mean, we're starting to see elements of Republicans breaking with Trump a little bit here and there, and yet his hold on the party is still relatively strong considering all the polling data. And Jonathan, I mean, you saw the War Powers vote. He managed to turn back 2 senators there, Josh Hawley and one other, and Todd Young. And then on the Obamacare subsidies, he continues to be able to keep them a little bit in line. I mean, the House obviously passed a bill, but it doesn't look like it's got anything in the Senate. You would think at some point Republicans hoping to save their own skin here, given all the surroundings, would have some sort of breaking points with the guy. But basically, it's come down to Tom Tillis and a few others, and largely the party still is in line with him.
Yeah, there have been a few cracks, but we shouldn't overstate. Trump still, his grip on the GOP is pretty firm.